this is what we'll be seeing.
It's cutting head, but it is just Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to a Kara webinar. Thank you very much for keeping time. It's 4 o'clock. We are going to start right away. We already have a number of participants on board. We also have our panelists who have joined us. So I believe that we are good to go. So this is the third Kara webinar in a series of several that I'm going to have in partnership with Safaricom. And we must start by thanking Safaricom for this partnership that has enabled us to ensure that we are providing platforms for engagement, and particularly for educating the public on a number of topical issues that are of interest to us. We are focusing on a very interesting subject today, and we are going to talk about the subject on base transceiver stations and EMF, electromagnetic frequencies. And our interest on this topic is basically to try and understand a few issues around them. As Kara, we have been engaging our members, and some of the issues when it comes to the issue of base transceiver station is what exactly are the impact of these stations. There have been issues about health impact, there have been issues about environmental impact, and of course a number of questions being asked around the installation of the stations. So we thought that as part of educating our members, and most importantly as a way of addressing some of these concerns, some of which are very valid, we needed to have this kind of discussion so that we can get to understand exactly what are the issues, what are the facts about the installations, the BTS, and what are some of the myths also, because some of the issues that are being talked about are basically myths and are out of misunderstanding of this information by the communities. So the discussion today is designed to provide a very incisive insight into what exactly do we understand around BTS and the EMF, and what, for instance, we need to do as resident associations, as individuals, as communities, when we have a particular issue around the installations. Like I mentioned, these webinars are organized in partnership with Safaricom, who have been our partners for a number of years, and we are grateful that we are able to work with Safaricom to have this kind of educative forums. To help us understand these issues, we have a panel of speakers who are relevant to the subject of discussion today, and they're going to take us through some of the key highlights around environmental impact, health impact, and generally about what we need to know when it comes to base transceiver station installation, and also respond to some of the questions that have been brought forth to us. We did receive a number of questions in advance, which we shared with the panelists. So they are going to respond to some of those questions in their presentations. And of course, we are also going to have an opportunity for participants to react and maybe just ask 1 or 2 questions after the presentations. So with us this afternoon, we have in the panel Mr. Frederick Kabusia. Mr. Frederick Kabusia is a principal officer in charge of Spectrum at Safaricom, and he's going to give us his perspective on the topic of discussion today. We also have Mr. Michael Koech, who is a manager environment and climate change at Safaricom, also going to give us his perspective touching on environmental issues and impact of the BTS. We also have on board Mr. Zephania Ouma. Zephania Ouma is the Acting Director of Compliance and Enforcement at NEMA, that's the National Environment Management Authority. As you know, there's normally a process to installation of these BTS, and NEMA is involved, especially in assessing the environmental impact and trying to put in place regulation mechanism. So we are going to hear from NEMA exactly on what is their role on this whole process, and what kind of engagement do they expect or do they have with communities when going through the approval process. So Zephania is going to take us through that, and of course we are going to engage with them thereafter. We've also had a confirmation from Communications Authority. We are going to have a presenter from the Communications Authority, Mr. Nelson Wasilwa, who is a manager in charge of spectrum frequency management at the Communications Authority of Kenya. As you know, these are the sector regulator, and they are very, very key to whatever happens in this particular sector. On the subject of discussion today, we are going to hear from them exactly what is their role and how do they ensure that as we seek to improve services in terms of the network, the installations that are being put in residential areas and other places are meeting certain standards that will not that will ensure that they don't have negative impact on the community or the people living around that particular area. So Mr. Wasilwa will engage us from that perspective. So those are the four panelists that we have, and we hope that we should be able to take enough time to listen to them, but most importantly to also engage with the participants. So without taking much time, we just want to go straight to the discussion. And as always, we encourage you, if you have a comment or a question, you can make use of the chat box. You can post it on the chat box so that you can have a look at it. And if it's a question, direct to the right panelist. And also, like I mentioned earlier, we are going to allow a few questions after the presentation so that we can be able to engage and be interactive. And please, when you get the opportunity to ask a question, our request is that you make it very, very brief and to the point so that you can have enough time to engage. We also have a Twitter hashtag. We are trending on Twitter, and the hashtag is Kara Safaricom Forum. So if you have access to Twitter, please engage on that platform. You can post your comments as you go along. The session is also being being covered on Facebook. So those of you who are able to log into Facebook, you can feel free to follow the proceedings, or ask those who are not on board to follow it on Facebook. Our Twitter handle is Kara_cares KE, so you can always feel free to tag us through that Twitter handle. So ladies and gentlemen, because I'm not the presenter, I don't want to take much time talking about the issues. Let me take this opportunity to invite our first presenter for this forum today, and that will be Mr. Frederick Kabusia, who is the Principal Officer at Safaricom in charge of Spectrum. So Mr. Frederick Kabusia, if you can hear me, I request you to now take the floor and give us a presentation. And for the presenters, my request is that we try and keep our presentation to between 10 to 15 minutes maximum. I'll do the timing, so please, if I signal you, just know that your time is almost up, because we want to also have some time for interaction. So we request that you try and keep it within that particular time allocation, and then the next presenter will come on board. So, Bwana Kabusia, if you can hear me, please proceed with the presentation.
Thank you, Kara, NEMA, and the Communication Authority of Kenya, and most importantly, Kara and NEMA Kara for organizing this webinar, and NEMA for joining us to try and explain to members of the public what EMF is, what it PSPs, and try to allay the myriad fears found on social media, Facebook, and other websites. I'll talk about the Safaricom operations and how we follow the guidelines by the two authorities, NEMA and the Communication Authority of Kenya. Safaricom always operates its mobile network strictly within the national regulations, and those regulations are from NEMA and from the Communication Authority of Kenya, which are based on or go beyond IGNAP's guidelines. We will find out what IGNAP is, and we regularly monitor our operations to ensure we meet the regulation. NEMA will bear many witness that they are the agency that monitors our operations to check conformance to these IGNAP guidelines. And our network is, we plan, roll out, and operate our network based on three elements of the cellular mobile radio wave exposure framework. And these three frameworks are, the first one is or are the IGNAP guidelines. IGNAP is a non-governmental organization that sets radio frequency and EMF guidelines for engineers who work in equipment rooms and for members of the public. And so our role here is those guidelines come through the two regulators, NEMA and the Communication Authority of Kenya, and they're the ones who enforce those regulations. Now, this the second element is the same guidelines now have an element which the equipment manufacturers must adhere to before any equipment can be manufactured and be sold and be used by members of the public. And so here we have the Communication Authority of Kenya, who now comes in to check that every equipment that we bring in from any international destination has to be checked in a process called type approval. So before we roll out the network, we will make requests for 1 unit of the equipment to be shipped in. We will take it to the Communication Authority of Kenya to check that any EMF levels or radiations that emanate from that equipment are within the IGNAP, the first element, the IGNAP guidelines. Now, the third element of this cellular RF exposure framework revolve around the handsets that we use. We have a lot of handsets in the market, and most of them are not genuine. Now, these handsets play a big role in the EMF that we are exposed to. The reason being that if you have a mobile phone that has a value, so the IGNAP guidelines specify some values in terms of a specific absorption rate. So if you get a mobile phone from a genuine manufacturer with a specific absorption rate of 0.5, 0.5 being it's 0.5 of the IGNAP guidelines, which is 0.4 watts per square meter. So if you buy a mobile phone from any source, you need to check that mobile phone has been type approved. So this is now where the Communication Authority of Kenya now comes in again to check that the mobile phones being used by members of the public are type approved. And that is the third element of the cellular mobile radio wave exposure framework. So we have three: the IGNAP guidelines, then the compliance by the BTS manufacturers, and the compliance by the handset manufacturers. And those three are enforced by the Communication Authority of Kenya and NEMA. So before we roll out any BTS, we will apply to the National Environment Management Authority to give us a license. And what will happen is the NEMA has various experts which they have accredited. And so one of those experts to go to the area where we want to roll out this BTS, and will engage members of the public. So members of the public will fill a questionnaire, and based on that questionnaire, NEMA will grant us either an approval to go ahead and build, or disapproval for further engagement with the residents. So IGNAP is in full is an International Center for Ionizing Radiation Protection Board. Now this board is involved in matters of setting guidelines for especially activities, transmissions within 100 kilohertz of frequency to about 300 gigahertz. So as most of you will know, when I'm talking about megahertz, that is the unit for frequency, and we use frequencies for communication towards your mobile phone. So this mobile handset requires there's a wireless interface, and it's a frequency that links it to the booster. Mostly people call it booster, but we call it a BTS. So now from the BTS, the signal is processed and transferred to the next network nodes, then to the person you are calling. So most of these frequencies, which we have seen so many, a lot of literature about cancer and these frequencies. We have this, before the mobile phone, we used to have the television, and we used to have the radar, and we still have them. The mobile phone, by the way, operates in the same frequency range as a TV. So if a mobile phone can harm you, then a TV should even harm you more than a mobile. The mobile phone is in the third element of the cellular mobile exposure safety framework. And what happens is, because this is near to you, some of us place it next to our chest. At the moment, the tower, as you move away from our tower, this mobile phone starts to radiate a lot of power, trying to locate where the network is. And as a result, you will feel a heat sensation on the phone. It gets heated up. And so by moving these masts, by moving these masts closer to members of the public, what we are trying to do is we are trying to reduce, first, the power consumption from your phone, then secondly, the EMF radiated from your phone. As you can see, these GSM antennas, and they radiate a signal in this manner, so that the blue zone is where mostly we have the occupational risks. This is where our engineers work from, and ICNAP has set guidelines for this. As you move away, the signal gets weaker. So when your phone is in this zone where the signal is weaker, it radiates a lot of power and therefore generates a lot of EMF. So you are better off next to the BTS, as your phone will use little power and it will radiate little EMF to affect you. So these four pictures just try to illustrate what goes on in the phone, and this is now the frequencies. We have several frequencies for voice and for 3G, the various frequencies here. So ICNAP again, together with an international agency that confines itself on researches to do with cancer, and both of them work hand in hand with the World Health Organization, have been picking any allegations on social media for peer reviews to find out whether we have any negative effects when somebody uses the phone for a prolonged time. And physically, or in physics, you look at the three states of matter: the solid, liquid, and gas. So what will happen? The human body is composed of all those three states of matter. So frequencies, especially at the ranges where we use, will penetrate your body. What will happen is the EMF will cause the water molecules to start moving. And because your body is a good electrical conductor of electricity, it has electrons and ions which are charged. So when the signal hits your body, what will happen is it will cause these water molecules, the ions and the electrons, to start moving. And it will convert itself in some kinetic energy of the sort. Now, as the particles keep on colliding, the particles I mean the water molecules, the ions, and other electrons within your body. As they keep on colliding, the end result will be generation of heat, and that heat will be manifested through sweating. So that is the only effect that the World Health Organization and ICNAP have found, that the EMF, especially around the non-ionizing zone, causes to the human body. If, for instance, you have a 500 watts bulb over your head, you will, and you sit there for a longer time, that bulb will have the same effect as what I've explained on your body, because you will start feeling some heating sensation and you start sweating. So for us to reduce this heating effect, we are advised to provide more towers, and these more towers will reduce now the power, because as we put more towers, we will reduce the power transmitted from our antennas towards your phone, and that reduces the EMF. So if you see us trying to put up another tower next to your building, Please don't ask us, but we have that one around there. We are trying to help you because if we leave you in that state, you will be your own mobile phone will cause a lot of EMF to you because it will be straining to acquire the network. So when we put another tower just in the neighborhood, next in the neighborhood, what we are trying to do is we are reducing these radiations. Now, if you hear of radiations, they are not ionizing because these are radiations that are controlled by the IGNAP. We have guidelines by IGNAP. And so if you go to above the 300 gigahertz, if I can have the other slide with some oscillations. If you go above 300 gigahertz, you will get some medical equipment, like the X-ray machines that operate above 300 gigahertz. But our operations are confined within around 3.5 gigahertz. We have now 5G, which is just coming up in America, going up all the way up to 50 gigahertz. But as you go up to 300 gigahertz is the boundary of where, on the left, we have the non-ionizing zone, and on the right, we have the ionizing zone. That is where we have now equipment like the X-ray machines, whose rays have a negative effect on your cell, and they cause cell mutations if you are exposed to them for even more than 10 minutes. And that's why if you go to hospitals, where we have the rooms that have X-ray machines are secluded, and we have warnings all over that you are not supposed to close by, because the radiations from the X-ray machine, and this is what I'm talking about, the radiations from the X-ray machine lie within the ionizing zone. And so we have the gamma rays and we have the ultraviolet rays that are very dangerous, in fact, to the human cells. Now, look at the visible light, which is the sun, which comes from the sun. It sits right at the boundary of the non-ionizing and ionizing. And we were born when the sun has been around, and has been around with us for quite a long time. So the rays from the sun are even more powerful than the rays from our mobile phones, because our mobile phones operate around here where we have the radio, we have the microwave, and we have the mobile phones. So the visible rays from the sun will contain more energy that will cause some negative effects on a human body than a mobile phone. That's why, as you visit Mombasa, you will see our friends, the whites, with sunscreens, because the sun rays are very powerful on their skins. I will stop there and give a chance to the next panelist.
Thank you very much, Frederick, for that presentation. I think that has given us the technical aspect of the subject of discussion today. And of course, in the process, you've allayed some of the fears that have been raised previously. Of course, we'll see if there is more clarification that is needed as we go along. So without taking much time, let me now welcome Michael Koech, who is Manager, Environment and Climate Change at Safaricom. And I believe that is going to talk to us from the environmental aspect of our subject of discussion today. And Michael, if you can do that in 15 minutes or so, that will be very fantastic. And I now welcome you to start off your presentation. Michael?
Thank you very much for this opportunity. I don't know whether you are hearing me clearly.
Yes, we can.
Okay, asante. So thanks. I think Frederick has taken us through a lot of technical information around EMF. I think this is a very important session to sort of clarify the concern on the concerns and that residents and Kenyan citizens generally have been having around EMF. So my name is Michael Koech. I look after environment and climate within Safaricom. And so the reason why I am speaking to you today is because our department actually holds the organization, accountable in terms of the impact it has on environment, social and governance issues. So from the technology perspective, it's us who sort of ensures that all the equipment that is rolled out there is actually compliant. We do a lot of measurements. We carry out environmental impact assessments, and I know Mr. Oma will be taking us through the process from the NEMA side. So from Safaricom side, it's us actually who does the EIA process as well as public participation. We interact a lot with the residents associations in that process. So just to give a background on what we do, before we roll out any mask, we do quite a number of things. First of all, what the process involves identifying the site. Looking which comes through looking at the gaps where networking is required. So if you've been, when you're driving across from region A to B, sometimes you realize that there are pockets of areas where the network isn't strong enough. So there's a whole process of site identification to get the most suitable sites to cover those areas that are sort of dark. We either do that through radio planning, so sending in a planner to go and do actual measurements. We also get calls from people, as well as even from social media. Once we do that, we commission our agents to get a site where we need to build a mask. And then we get an agency who does environmental impact assessment. And this is the point in which now we interact directly with CARA and its members. So EIA is normally a process that looks at the social impacts, environment impacts, among others. And it's also an opportunity where you interact directly through various channels with the communities, just for them to air their views and also to answer any questions that might come. Of course, we also get what Frederick has said. We also ensure that the equipment is type approved. The Kenya Civil Aviation, because of the height, as well as the actual public participation, where you interact directly with the residents. And this is a point where now you do your report, take it to NEMA. One of the key things that we do around EMF at this point in time is also to do an actual measurement, of radio frequency, as Frederick has talked about, just to know the baseline before you install the mask, and also to compare with the standards that has been talked about, the International Commission or non-ionizing radiation. So the set standards is normally compared with what you get. And we then submit the full report to NEMA, they review it, takes about 20 to 45 days to do that. And then they will either give you a license if everything is in order, or they can issue you with a letter asking you for more information, in terms of probably the gaps that would be in the report, which we action and then send it back, and then now we get the license at the end of it. Then once the site is rolled out, then we, after 1 year, we do environmental audits. Now this is an opportunity to check whether all the things that have been stipulated in the license have been implemented. And for the sake of this session, one of the key things again is actually to do the actual measurements, of the radiation or the frequency fields that are there, and then you compare it with the standards. I think I need to mention at this point that from all the studies that we've done in our sites, all of them are actually below the required standards. That means they meet the requirements, and not by a small margin. Some could be even as low as by 2,000. In terms of what the experts talk about, says, and I think the World Health Organization has been, and as well as IGNAP, have been doing a lot of research on this field because of different concerns worldwide that have been raised on radio frequencies. And out of this, in 2011, the WHO made a conclusion that a large number of studies have been performed over the last 2 decades to assess whether mobile phones pose a potential health risk. And to date, no adverse health effects has been established as being caused by mobile phones. So that's one conclusion that has been made. IGNAP also, in the latest guidelines, which is a revision of the 1998 guidelines that they issued, also stated in the summary of the report that there is no evidence of adverse health effects at exposure levels below the restriction levels in the IGNAP guidelines, and no evidence of an interaction mechanism that would predict that adverse health effects could occur due to radio frequency EMF exposure below these restrictions. So there are quite a number of studies that have been done, and all of them seems to be coming with the same conclusion. And as Fred has said, when you look at the ranges, what comes out of mobile phones or BTS is actually close to what we interact with, in everyday life, the televisions, the radio waves, Wi-Fi, and lights. So one of the key questions we normally get is there a risk, living close to a base station? And I would like to say, I think there is a consensus scientific view that there is no health risk from living near a base station. Because mobile phone base stations use low power radio transmitters to reduce interference, from to the nearby sites. And as Fred has clearly put it, I think in terms of the energy that is required for communication between the phone and the base station, it's actually lower, if you are close, because the biggest effect is actually on the heating, on the heat from the energy. So measurements surveys show that exposure to base station radio signals range from 0.002% to 2% of the levels of international exposure guidelines. So from those guidelines, even from our own measurements for the BTS stations through our audits, we are actually within that range. It's normally like 0.01%. So I think, just to allay those concerns, I think in terms of energy required, it's safer to be closer to a base station than if you are away. There was a question that came from one of the audience, who I believe is here, of a study that was done in Iran, which talked about people living near base stations exhibiting symptoms of nausea, headache, dizziness, within the vicinity. I think I must say here that the best transceiver stations, I think the maximum power, and Fred, you can correct me if I'm wrong, is about 60 watts, the maximum you can get. While we have other, other transmissions like, TV broadcasts in the country, even aircraft radars, that could even be having higher power. But the overall impact, of course, is the intensity, or what gets out of the radiation from the mobile phone stations is actually lower. And so for Safaricom base stations, our standards are actually within, the IGNAP guidelines. Lastly, I think there was a question around, it was still around the proximity. Oh yes, there was one around co-location. So one of the questions is, do mobile networks actually co-locate? So using the same infrastructure? And I would say the answer is yes. In areas where we have a close proximity base station, we don't actually need to do a new one. There's room to co-locate with the other sister companies, and then use the same, because what is more important is the installation of the equipment, which is the antenna, and that's what gives communication. So it's aesthetically it's more visible to actually co-locate. The only challenge is there could be areas where there is none. So that's when we would actually require to build a new one. So I think I would want to stop at that and then see questions that will come through the chat, and we should be able to answer them. Thank you very much, and back to you.
Thank you very much, Michael, for that presentation. At least you've been able to demonstrate to us the process that you go through before you finally do the installation. And this has been an issue because I know that Michael and I have had to meet a number of resident associations just to try and make some kind of presentation on what exactly the installation means and how it's going to benefit them, and of course respond some of the questions. So I believe that in the process of this presentation, we've been able to answer a number of questions that were shared earlier, and of course more might come as we go along. So Michael, thank you for those very insightful highlights. And now we are going to go to our next presenter, who is Mr. Zephaniah Ouma from NEMA, National Environment Management Authority. As you know, NEMA is one of the regulators and of course look at the issue of environment and how the installation of the BTS is going to impact on the environment. Michael has mentioned that they must submit a request to NEMA for approval, and so at the end of the day, NEMA has a responsibility to be able to determine whether the BTS should or should not be installed, and if it must be installed, what are the mitigation measures that must be put in place. So NEMA is going to talk to us from that perspective, and I invite Zephaniah Ouma, who is the Acting Director in charge of compliance and enforcement at NEMA, to share with us his presentation, and of course try and keep it within the time limit. Before he comes, I'll request that if you have any question to any of the presenters, there's an option of raising your hand. You can click on that option, you can raise your hand, we'll sit and pick it up, or you can drop a comment or a question on the chat box, so that after this presentation, we can take a few questions from the people participating and get the response from the panelists. So please, if you have a question, raise your hand or drop it on the chat box, and we'll go to pick it up. So allow me to invite Zephaniah Ouma from NEMA to make his presentation. Zephaniah? Unmute your microphone.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Proceed.
Thank you. Is my presentation, am I to share it?
Yes, you can share.
Okay. Yes, thank you for this opportunity to Kara and Safaricom. This is a good way of trying to communicate risk and is one of the key functions of the authority. To go straight to the point so that we save time, my presentation outline is as seen there. I believe on the radiation from the communication infrastructure, which Fred and Mike has done quite well. Look at the effects of EMR on human health, which again they have touched on a bit. Then I come now to NEMA's role in the management of risk, where I'll highlight the need for the meaningful project affected persons consultations, that is what we call the PAP. We look at NEMA as a manager of risk. We do a comparative risk analysis, which also Fred pointed out a bit. Look at precautionary principle as is applicable. And then the environmental planning tools, that is the environmental impact assessment and the environmental audit requirements. I'll brush on this. I think this has been dealt with quite well, but it's good for it to come from a regulator point of view. That EMR, whether it is EMR, whether it is EMF, or it is RF, is part of our everyday life. The natural sources is confirmed. We have got the sun, and other sources within the ionosphere. Artificial sources, these are gadgets we have lived with for a long time, from the TV transmission, the microwave, the transmitters, and of course the remote controls, the AM and the FM radio signals are issues, are equipments that we have lived with for quite some time. The big question has been this, and Fred also clarified that EMR is non-ionizing. And to unbundle this so that we get it clear, this means that it is not able to directly impact enough energy to a molecular or an atom to break the chemical bonds. In contrast, ionizing radiation, like the X-rays, as we said, can strip the electrons from the atoms and the molecules, and this process produces molecular changes that can lead to a damage to biological tissue. So these are facts, again, a clinical fact that we need to get right. Briefly on the effects of EMR, EMF on the human health. A lot of research has been done, dating back to 1960s, on the health effects associated with exposure to non-ionizing radiation. Issue of cancer, I think this research has gone on, and there's no clear evidence that has been found that the exposure to this radiation can cause cancer. And the reference materials are there, which if interested on, you can be able to look at. I know there's an updated ones, which also help us to understand this technology better. The most recent studies also find no association for childhood cancer with exposure to electromagnetic radiation. Results of studies indicating that exposure to RF field causes influences cancer are inconclusive. Although some studies have associated lens defects with microwave radiation exposure, the present view is that low-level chronic exposure to microwave radiation does not induce cataracts in man. Going ahead with the next slide, just to make sure that we get this right. When human head is exposed to a pulsed irradiation, such as a radar, an audible sound described as a buzz, or a chick, or a click, or a knocking sensation is perceived by some. So this is from a research point of view, where you expose a human head, and not the normal AC situation. One of the effects, again, which has been confirmed of the RF, that is the non-ionizing radiation, is heat due to the absorption of the body tissue. Reports have also been made of symptoms such as nervousness, disturbed sleep, and fatigue associated with the use of the mobile phone. However, studies done to prove the significant association between the use of the mobile phones and the above-mentioned symptoms remain inconclusive. It is true because BTS or a mobile phone is just one of the meters of the non-ionizing radiation. And I mentioned that the other factors are there, the sun, the TVs, and so on. So the inconclusiveness points to a kind of accumulative effect that might arise when you have a number of emitters in a given group. So these are issues that need to come out clearly as we understand the subject matter. Now, NEMA's role is, I've summarized them into 5. Number 1 is to ensure there's meaningful project-affected persons consultation. Number 2, I also want us to appreciate NEMA as a manager of risk. And it's also good to appreciate the viewers and the listeners that the impossibility of a risk-free environment, and noting that some of the risks arise from the natural sources. I'll take you through a comparative risk analysis, which to me is a useful aid so that the public in discourse on risk can be addressed. And this involves the use of some statistics that will shed more light on the risk associated. Take your observation on the precautionary principle as is applicable. And lastly, the issue of environmental impact assessment and environmental audit to ensure that the standards, the conditions are met by the operators. Is giving them quite some work. How meaningful, how inclusive is public consultation done to accept, for that acceptability to be seen? For a long time, we were at the level of 1, just to inform, and I think we have graduated this lesson with the Safaricom and other service providers in coming up with the guidelines of, and this being given to the NEMA licensed experts on the threshold, on the minimum standards which must be met when we are doing the consultations. And I think in most cases, we have reached an area where we are involving. There are certain resident associations which I think have gone further, and the consultation levels might have reached the empowerment level. We find it key, despite these facts, that consensus building is very key With all the facts, and I know there are a lot of anxiety surrounding the BTSs, we normally ensure that building consensus among the project affected persons is key. And we try that the positions that the stakeholders have, the interests and issues which they have needs to come out, needs to come out. The need to zopa the zone of possible agreement on the siting, what I call a zopa, and then the building of relationship from there. That point is very key so that we build a strong grievance redress mechanism that might arise at any time when there's a concern. Number two is NEMA in risk management. And this is an integrated field. And I like Frederick when he started of the work that the International Center for Non-Ionizing Radiation Board has done, the work that the manufacturers should be doing to ensure that the standards, as they manufacture the equipment, the standards are met. That they have determined the dangerous and harmful factors that might be associated. And that's why when we showed that graph, there's a limit where the non-ionizing ends, and then you start on the ionizing. That part is risk assessment. That data is now clear, that the BTSs, the emissions from the RF, and all that is non-ionized. And there's a level within which they are safe to us. Risk assessment now is making improving plans on the basis of the assessment and putting the improving plans in practice. That is the work of NEMA, that is the work of the CA, the Regulation Authority of Kenya, that could be the work of KED, that could be the work of the Radiation Protection Board, and also should be the work of the service provided. And that is what NEM does. The third one, which is very key, and this is what we are doing today, is the issue of risk communication. And I thank Kara and Safaricom for facilitating this. And it is communicating, you need to communicate risk to the public, to the consumers, how unsafe they are, and vice versa, how safe they are. And what they should do to ensure that the safety factor is enhanced. And true, this is where what we are doing. Comparative risk analysis, it has been said, and I think it's good that it comes from me as a lay that while BTSs operates at a higher powers than the mobile phones, the RF exposures that people get from BTS are typically thousands of times lower than those from the mobile handsets. A comparative risk analysis, so that you just know that the handset comparatively is more harmful than the base transmitter station. So if there's a DC course, the first thing on a light note is to throw the handset away. Two, the body absorbs up to 5 times more of the same signal from FM radio and television than from the BTS. Just get it from there. The below is just facts on the frequency used and how they are absorbed by the body. Furthermore, radio and TV broadcast stations have been in operation for the past 50 or more years. Again, that was alluded to, just emphasis on that. Documented annual risks of death associated with some of the activities and exposures. This is a confirmed case, so that I was saying there's no life without risk, and what we do is to try to minimize these risks.
Zephania?
The annual death.
Zephania?
Yes.
Yeah, very useful presentation. May I just request you try to summarize the remaining slides so that you can catch up on time, please.
Okay. All right, thank you. I think I have two slides to go. Thanks a lot. Then what NEMA's role on application of the precautionary principle, we have adopted what the World Health Organization has advised based on the research that we have done. And one from the government point of view is that we need to encourage the reduction of RF feeds by the equipment manufacturers, and I think this is one issue that we are trying to follow up, and I know the communication authority will build on this more. On individuals, again, we need to limit the length of calls. We also tried using the hand-free devices if we can. And that is critical, so that if you are in a confinement where you have got many meters of RF, then we try to limit that cumulative impacts. Yes, on number 5, which is environmental impact assessments, of course that goes with environmental audit requirements. We look for comprehensive discussion on the exposure of impacts of EMF and the mitigation factors which have been put in place. Critical, and which I needed to point out alone, was the issue of inclusive and adequate public consultation done. The other issue is the adequate site-specific invest line, so that, and this is where we rely on Safaricom well, so that the linkage between site acquisition and undertaking EIA becomes very key. Discussions on structural stability of the tower and the masts, I think people have talked of this, and the need for the setback distance, the fall zone of 1.5 times the height of the tower. It's a debatable issue because it goes, there are rider to it that if there's a proper maintenance plan, then the applicability of this might be valid. The other issue is the visual impacts in relation to the background. Based on the foregoing, there are critical analysis of alternatives that we also look at. On location, I think there was a question that was asked on this, and this is quite key. The problem which Michael did not want to say is the business rival, the fear for a sabotage. I think this has led this beautiful way of going about this to suffer. It will have solved a lot of concerns as pertains to the visual impact of these towers. Greenfield, there are alternatives, the site selection I've talked about. The desire to have a greenfield or a lattice tower on the ground, vis-a-vis having a rooftop, and vis-a-vis having a small cell and in the offices, in the basements, and so on. The discussions on the lattice tower, the discussion on the monopole, the discussion on the camouflage. These are issues that now will help us to reduce on some of the impacts. And the authority has prescribed what should be done, like a camouflage in the parks, in the reserves. I think this has worked well. Some leafy suburbs, I think the CCT also, we adopt that. For a long time, the electricity source, there was standby genset, and of course, there were issues to do with noise on this, and there were impacts, there were mitigation measures which were also prescribed accordingly to address the vibrations and to address the noise. And of course, last but not least, is the issue of occupational safety. Fall protection program is very, very key. And of course, what Mike has said and Fred, and the exposure to MF within that zone. So I know it is an evolving field. And after the EIA, of course, we have the environmental audits, just to confirm the adequacy and the efficacy of the environmental management plans. A plan that we do as part of the EIA, a plan that is signed between NEMA and the service providers, and the audit now checks on how that plan works. I also want to add that EIA and the environmental audit is structured well, and here among it is the critical need for institutional recognition, where before we license a facility, we will have contacted all the relevant government agencies who has a mandate on an activity of that nature. So the coordinator, I think that marks the end of my presentation, but also just to highlight that risk management is a balance of risk and the benefits. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Zephania, for that very comprehensive presentation. Zephania has taken us through the 5 roles of NEMA. I will not go through them again in the interest of time. We need to proceed to the next presenter. So what I'm going to request is that for the other panelists who are not presenting, I want to request you to check on the chat box, the Q&A section. There are a number of questions that have been listed there. Just go to the chat box and you'll see them. So maybe as we go along, we can try and respond some of those questions in the chat box posted by various participants, so that we can be able to answer as many questions as possible. So Frederick, Michael, Zephania, you can just check the chat box and try and respond to some of the questions that have been posted there. We have one more presenter, Bwana Nelson Wasilwa from the Communications Authority of Kenya. As I said, these are also regulators in the sector and very, very key players as far as the subject of discussion today is concerned. So, Bwana Wasilwa, I know some of the issues that you could have talked about have been presented by the previous presenters. So, if that is the case, I'm going to request that you jump that particular aspect of your presentation and maybe just mention to us briefly about the specific role of the CA on the whole process of BTS installation, and of course how you engage with communities. So if you can do that in a very few minutes, because we are racing against time, we really appreciate. So Wasilwa, I request that you take the floor and try and make your presentation within maybe 5 to 10 minutes maximum. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kara. Thank you, Safaricom. Thank you, Nema, and everyone. My name is Nelson Wasilwa, and I would like to just actually strictly look at the authority's role, since most of the items have been actually talked about by other presenters. So first I'll just introduce the role of CA. Basically, CA is a regulator that it deals with telecommunications, cybersecurity, e-commerce, broadcasting, and postal and courier services. We also manage the numbering resources. I hope I'm being heard.
Yes, we can hear you. Proceed.
Yes. Thank you very much. So we also administer the USF fund and also safeguard interest of ICT users. So basically, in as much as the electromagnetic radiation is concerned, basically I was to introduce about the EMF, but I think Mr. Kapusia did a very good job, so I'll skip that one. And then I also wanted to talk about the electromagnetic spectrum, which is actually divided into the non-ionizing and ionizing bands. But I think Kakusia did a very wonderful job on that one as well, so I will skip that one. Now, we have public concerns about EMF, and mostly in the radio spectrum, in the communication side, the concern is about deployment of radio communication installations around community areas. So people living close to base stations are concerned and about the effect, the health effect of base stations on their health. And much of the public concern relates to the possibility of health hazards from long-term exposures at levels too low to produce measurable heating. So, because of these concerns, we have several government agencies that regulate the EMF, as my previous presenters have talked about. We have the NEMA, who has actually been very elaborate on this. We have the Radiation Protection Board, the Communications Authority of Kenya, KEBS and others. But I'll now run down to the role of the Communications Authority of Kenya. So our role in this very important subject is basically defining the maximum permissible levels of the EMF radiation that network operators and other radio communication equipment licensees are supposed to roll out. So we determine the power levels, we determine the frequency, and the levels that are permissible to be radiated to the public. And in so doing, we perform what we call type approval. We type approve all telecommunication equipment. For example, all network operators that want to roll out, they bring samples of their telecommunication equipment like base stations and mobile phones for us to type approve. Equipment that do not pass these standards are not allowed to be rolled out in the field. We also conduct evaluation of radio transmission installations. For example, in the case of Safaricom, we do inspection, on-site inspection, as well as doing measurements, RF measurements, as well as EMF measurements on the installations that exist by network operators, Safaricom, Airtel, Telcom, and all of them. So we also sensitize, help in the process of sensitizing the public on the effect of exposure to electromagnetic flows within the radio frequency spectrum. Basically, our major interest is the range of 9 kilohertz to 300 gigahertz, which is the radio frequency spectrum range. We also have, I also want to talk about international harmonization of the EMF safety limits, but I think my previous two presenters have elaborately talked about the ICNAP and the World Health Organization's role in this very big process, so I'll skip that one. Now, let's talk about the myths that have been going around surrounding the EMF effect on health. For example, one of the myths is that the mobile phone is so powerful that they literally cook your brain. The truth is that mobile phones typically have an output of less than 1 watt. And that is very negligible, and it cannot affect the brain. Another myth that has actually gone around is that it is dangerous to live next to a base station. The truth is that at the ground of a base station, the intensity of the radio frequency radiation from the base station is less than 1,000, and I think my colleague from NEMA talked about this. So it's much, much less than the radiation from a mobile phone. So generally, it is safe to live below a base station. Another myth that is actually taking around the corner is that nobody is really investigating the dangers of electromagnetic radiation. The truth is that the World Health Organization and many other agencies, including CA, are very concerned about this, and they have done studies that take into consideration the health of users of radio communication equipment. So just to conclude, I would like to assure you that despite the extensive research, to date, there is no evidence to conclude that exposure to low-level electromagnetic fields is harmful to human health. Number two, the Communications Authority of Kenya is exercising its mandate to ensure that telecommunication operators work within the limits, the EMF limits, when they are setting up their base stations and when they are rolling out their networks. I think that will be my last point, and I thank you very much for this opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Honorable Silva, for making it brief and to the point. You've been able to make reference to some myths and, of course, respond to them. And I hope that our participants are getting enlightened. There's a lot of interaction going on in the chat box. There are questions being asked, there are responses being received from the panelists, and we should continue with that so that we can cover as much ground as possible. For now, I can see a few hands raised. So I'm going to give you a minute to ask your question directly to the panelists you wish to answer, and then we can go to the next next participant. So, Teacher Gideon, I can see your hand is raised. Can you please ask your question? You can unmute. Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much for the presenters and all the organizers. I think Bwana Wasilwa has answered part of my question, which was the issue to do with living with the base transmitters, either in the office surrounding or at home surroundings. And the issue to do with the demystifying the myths on the radiation is what is important, and I wanted to find out from them as to whether there is conclusive evidence on harmful effects in terms of health deterioration, or even signs that would make people not, for example, have sleep, be having fatigue when they are working from home and all that. Because with such concerns, it's just important to know what is right and what is not right. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. Either Frederick or Michael will take that. Let's have the next question. Kevin Opio, you can mention your name and, of course, where you come from, either resident association or your organization, please.
Yes, I work for Southern University. Thank you very much. My name is Kevin Opio. So I'm asking Nelson Silva that he has mentioned that the authority has conducted some studies. So can you mention maybe one or two of those studies, and are they public? Is this something you can look at? And how do those studies rank with international studies? Like I posted a link to one of the studies that showed that the harmful effects to health of these base stations in 300 meters, 300 meters of their location. So I'm very happy he has mentioned they do studies. So this study is public, and can he just give us maybe an example of one of the studies and what the study said about the harmful effects of base stations? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kevin, for that question to Bwana Silva. I'll give a response. Can we get another question from Richard Manyala? Richard, can you hear us? You can unmute your mic. If we can't get Richard, then let's hear from Bwana Gitahi.
I'm there.
Okay, Richard, proceed.
Hello?
Proceed, Richard.
Thank you. When I was seeing where you ended up with a warning statement that currently nobody is doing supervision on the electromagnetic, what I didn't get you right, on the electromagnetic radiation. So do you think this is a very dangerous statement? Who is supposed to do this? And at what point are people in the danger?
Thank you very much, Richard, for that question, Bwana Silva. We are going to take two last questions. I can see two hands, and then we can close. Bwana Gitahi, can you ask your question, please? Gitahi, can you unmute your mic? Okay, Gitahi, if you can hear us, maybe we can proceed to the next participant. Patrick Wandare, can you ask your question, please? Mr. Wandare, can you unmute your mic, please?
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can. Proceed.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can.
Can you hear me now?
We can hear you, Mr. Wandare. Ask your question, please.
Thank you very much. Very brief. About myths that he has talked about, is there any way that the Communications Authority could be able to reach on the general public to try to clarify to them this fact of myths which are not true, so that this fear that we have, including me, can come to a rest, especially moving near the machines that cause this fear of paralyzing the body. I thank you.
Thank you very much, Bwana Wandare, for that question. There's a hand for Michael Koech. Maybe you can take that as the last one. Michael Koech?
Can I go on now?
Yes, proceed.
Yes. I want to thank all the presenters that are presented in this meeting. The topic is very, very important. And question number one, I would like to raise a question to Engineer Kibusia. One is that microwaves that we have in our homes, when heating or when microwaving various types of foods and drinks, how far for safety reasons should we stay from the microwaves while doing all these activities of microwaving? What is the safest distance that we can be? Secondly, very quickly, is that what about the masks that are in residential community areas where people live or where they are from, where they are very, very near to people, and the electromagnetic and the impact of those people in those communities? Who monitors them and who tell us whether they are safe or not? Is it the community, is it the Communications Authority, or is it the NEMA, or who does this and ensures that safety of people are guaranteed and protected? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Bwana Koech, for that question. I think we've taken the question that for those who raised their hands, and our presenters are going to respond to them. A number of questions have been responded to on the chat box, and there's a lot of interaction going on there. And of course, there are some that were sent in advance, which were covered during the presentation. So for now, we are just going to ask the panelists to respond to the questions. I can see a number of questions were directed to CA, but of course there are some that touch on Safaricom. So in the order of our presentation, I'm going to ask Frederick to respond to the questions that are directed to Safaricom, particularly to him, and then we'll also hear from Michael Koech. So Frederick Abusia, please, can you take the floor? Frederick, you can hear? Can unmute?
Yes, yes.
Okay.
In trying to issue responses to members of the public who have asked those questions, I would like to request that I present one slide here.
Okay, can do that from your end.
That's okay. Are we able to see this?
Yes.
Yes.
Good.
We can
Now, installation of masts near residential areas cannot be conclusively explained without going through this diagram, and I will, though it is technical, I will try to make it simpler. Now, this diagram here is a radiation pattern of an antenna, be it a GSM antenna or a microwave antenna. Now, as you see, we have this primary lobe which faces the area that we want to cover. And we have these back lobes that are very small, that mostly face, if you see a tower next to your building, you see we have installed them in a manner to make the antennas back face the building. So by so doing, we are reducing beaming the signal inside the building. And as you can see, there was a question by Honorable Mtoro on the chat on why the judges refused to occupy the Elgon House because they were citing dangers of being fried by the microwaves. Now, the second photo here shows round dishes that were at that time mostly on the towers at South Hill, where the Elgon House is located. Now, from the tower that had these antennas to Elgon House, there was a distance of about 15 meters. Now, most of these antennas were facing away from Elgon House. They were, I'm saying were because they have now been recovered. They were radiating their signals towards Mombasa Road. And these are the microwave links that KPTC and Telecom Kenya used to use for inter-county communication. You see, one dish like this is forming the terrestrial route towards Mombasa and is picking traffic from the coastal region to Nairobi. So now, as I had shown you up here, the back of most of these antennas were facing Elgon House. And as you can see from the radiation patterns here, this back lobes, these ones are what we call back lobes. This is the signal that the antenna transmits backwards. This is what we call a back lobe. So this signal, because most of them were microwaves, cannot go more than 4 meters behind the antenna. And Elgon House was 15 meters from the towers. So it shows that, and there was one expert who went there and conducted the research and disapproved all the fears by the judges. So if you see a microwave antenna or a PTS antenna next to your building, in most cases, the back will be facing the building. And in any case, even if part of the main lobe, because this is where most of the signal is contained. And this is what we want now to transmit to mobile phones. So, however much some of this is radiating your building, as I said in my initial speech, is that it is within the ICNAP guidelines. And so within the ICNAP guidelines, which are regulated and enforced by the two regulators, the NEMA and the Communication Authority of Kenya. So you won't lose your sleep when a tower is 5 meters or 10 meters behind your house. You won't lose your sleep. And you should know that some of the signals do not pierce through solid objects like walls. So what needs therefore to be understood is that you could be living next to the tower, yet you don't have the signal to your mobile phone. And as I said initially, we are trying to bring these services closer to the residents, now going to micro-coach, closer to the residents, because if we leave it far away from the residents, what will happen is your mobile phone will turn against you. This mobile phone will turn against you, because what will happen is in trying to access the network, it will use more battery and it will radiate more power, and therefore more EMF into your body. So you are safer when you have a mast closer by than when you have a mast far away. So because whatever rollout and planning and everything that we do to serve you conforms to the regulations set by our two regulators, NEMA and the Communication Authority of Kenya, that are within the confine of the international, that are set by the international, the International Center for Non-Ionizing Radiation Protection Board. For microwaves, staying behind, like when somebody is using a microwave in his house to warm his food, the minimum distance to be to keep himself or herself from the microwave. If you it appears you joined our webinar when I had made my presentation. If you look at the frequencies around which microwaves operate, they lie within the non-ionizing range, but they are more powerful than the signals from our phone. And so what needs to be done is you limit the exposure. When you are warming food, don't stand and wait for the food to warm. Put the food in the microwave, put it on, because it will take like a few minutes. Have a seat 2 meters away, then wait for it to give you an alarm. Go pick your food. Because the moment it gives you an alarm, it shows it has stopped radiating those the frequencies that are responsible for warming food. Thank you. If I have not answered you in an elaborate manner, then you are free to ask me again. But due to time, I wish to stop here and give a chance to my other colleagues to respond.
Thank you very much, Frederick, for that response. I'm sure the people who asked the question have heard you, and if there is need for clarification, we should be able to make that maybe after this. So let me ask Michael Koech just to weigh in on the questions that were asked. And some of them I can see you've responded on the chat box, but maybe your remarks based on what has been asked by the various participants. Michael Koech?
Yeah, thank you. I think Frederick for sure has covered most of what was directed to Safaricom. I only want to say that the main impact that we are looking at here for the non-ionizing radiation is actually the heat, and it has been mentioned. So it's because of the energy that it gets heat up, but this heat is not sufficient to change or alter, the body's cells in any way. And it has also been mentioned that the heat from the mobile phone, from your battery, for example, is because it's trying to locate where the signal is. So, as Mr. Omar put it, there is more energy radiated from the phone than from the BTS. So if you've got to make a decision on which one is better, I think it's the BTS getting closer to you, so that you receive signals without any strength. So I don't want to take a lot of time because I think it has been covered. It's only interesting to know that there is a Michael Koech who is like me. I wish he could have put on his video so that I can I can see. But thank you very much. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Michael Koech. That one is called Professor Michael Koech, a member of CARA and the chair of our Environment Committee. So maybe one day we can get to meet. So thank you, Michael, for that response. Now, Bwana Zephania Ouma, a number of questions have come through, and of course, we would like to hear your comment, particularly on the aspect of public participation. I've seen a number of comments saying that how does that happen? What happens when there are issues against installation of the BTS? So maybe as you respond, you can address also specifically about public participation and what action NEMA takes when there's an issue that has been raised by communities. So Zephania, please. Zephania, can I unmute your mic? Zephania, are you with us?
Yes, you can hear me?
Yes, we can hear you now.
Oh, okay. I think there are a number of concerns which I might want to run through very quickly. But if I start with the case of the need for adequacy of the public consultation, a case of Kitisun, I think this is a case that can be brought to the attention of the authority. It could be an isolated case. And this is a case I emphasized on the strengthening the linkage between site acquisition and the need for the EIA process. Because we have now issued very clear standard procedures and the minimum requirements on what should constitute inclusive public participation before the BTSs are constructed. So it's an issue that can be brought to the attention of the authority. We have a full desk that engages the service providers, and I think we can address it. On the other issue from Patrick Wandare, I think you misunderstood me. I was very clear that there is no causal association. The word no causal association for cancer with exposure to EMF. So I didn't say it causes cancer. James Mutinda, I think, had a concern, and it's the same concern which I addressed. And this is a case which I think the service providers need a round table to talk. And it's very right that co-location is not fully utilized. And as authority, as an issue we have pointed out to the service providers. And what is the problem is the business rivalry. And the fear for the sabotage. So it's an issue that I call upon. Of course, I also call upon the CA, also call upon the other government agencies to help us how we can optimize on this opportunity. The other issue which touched on NEMA is the issue of structural stability, the issue of the fault zone, which Mr. Samuel Kandi said has not been practiced. And I thought I gave a rider to the same when I mentioned the threshold, what the standard is, and there's a rider, because the standard is 1.5 times the height of the tower, but there's a rider on provision of proper structural integrity of the towers, together with a comprehensive maintenance plans. So if this is clearly done, then there's a rider that fault zone might be not as prescribed in the standard. The other issue which touched on our part, which I think Professor Michael correct, I need to recognize him. That is the first DG NEMA. Was who monitors the impact of masks on public health. I concur, because studies, yes, have been done, and I pointed out that the process of environmental audit, which is being done by the service providers as required in law, engages NEMA licensed environmental experts. This planning tool, or this monitoring tool, is multidisciplinary, and in most cases there's expertise that do monitor the levels of the EMS. Again, I mentioned these planning tools are interagency in nature, and we also bring in all the government agencies. So by the time NEMA is issuing a compliance letter to an environmental audit being submitted on base transmitter stations, then all that had already been confirmed that substantively the required standards are met. So I think the coordinator, the last one which I think was from Collins Kowal, I think that my presentation can share. I'm a public officer, so whatever we found out can be shared well. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Zephania, for the response. And of course, we'll also share the presentations that we have with participants. So finally, let's hear from Bwana Wasilwa. There are a number of questions to CA. So please just take a few minutes to respond to the questions. Bwana Wasilwa?
Thank you very much. Actually, most of the questions I've responded to, but I'll just narrow into what was concerning CA. Maybe the first question was about studies that I mentioned, that we take part in studies that concern EMF. Normally, for studies to be effective, they take a collaborative effort. So CA collaborates with partners in terms of studies. Now, Kenya is a member state of the International Telecommunication Union, and CA represents Kenya at the ITU. So we have what we call study groups. Study groups study technical technologies that come up and therefore set standards. After every 4 years, we have what we call the WRC, World Radio Conference, that sits together and sets standards in terms of telecommunication. So CA participates in these studies, and those are some of the efforts that we do. The results will be found on the IT websites. We have a study group for standards, and those of us who are interested in frequency or in radio, then we also have standards for radio communication. The second question was about that I said nobody is doing supervision on the EMF. I think I said it is a myth that nobody is actually doing anything to supervise the impact of EMF on the human, on the health of people around us. And I said the truth is that we are concerned about the health and the impact of EMF, and that is why we have several government bodies, including NEMA, CA, and others, the Radiation Protection Board, that have come on board to ensure that standards are met when setting up base stations by operators. So I think that was a myth, and I said the truth is that we are concerned and we are regulating. So the third question was about, I think the third question is a shared responsibility between me and NEMA about who ensures, who is concerned about the impact of masks on the public health. And I think my colleague from NEMA has elaborately talked about this. And I will just add on and say it is actually collaborative. Okay, thank you. So it is a collaborative effort between different agencies. For example, NEMA, when they're doing the environmental impact assessment analysis, we are working together with them to ensure that the equipment, the telecommunication equipment that is installed in the masts meets the technical RF standards. So this collaborative effort is what is actually taking place. What was the other question? The other question was about CA could be able to reach the general public. What CA is doing to reach the general public. Now, we are trying to reach the public in several ways. We have what we call the ICT Week. The ICT Week brings together stakeholders in the ICT industry, and during the ICT Week, we share our opinions to the industry, and also the industry shares to everyone about what's going around. So that's one forum that CA uses to reach out to the stakeholders. The second way that we reach out to the public is we have what we call the county consumer forums. We go around every county sensitizing the public about what CA does, and by so doing, we normally reach out to the public. The other way is through the media. You remember when there was this myth about 5G causing COVID, we had to clarify this through the media, and that is another way that we actually reach out to the public. And we are open for any ideas that you can give us on how more effectively we can reach out to the public. Thank you very much. I think that's all about the questions that were directed to CA.
Thank you very much, Banasila, for that response to the questions. So, ladies and gentlemen, this is a very, very interesting and useful discussion. I wish we could continue beyond this, but as you can see, we have slightly overshot our time that we had allocated. So, we have to stop at this particular point, and we will try and see if we can have an opportunity to continue this discussion. I know that there are a number of questions that came through in advance. Some have been answered in the chat box. So as always, what I'm going to do is that we'll get the questions responded to by the panelists, and then we can share that through our communication channel, through the mail serve, through email, and also through our monthly newsletter. So please watch out for the response to the questions, which we'll share with you, and then you can be able to get to understand more about the subject of discussion. For now, I want to take this opportunity to thank all of you for joining up in this discussion and for being patient up to this particular time. Thank you very much, and watch out for our next series, which will be sometime in December. As I told you, these are a series of webinars that we are having. So before we break for Christmas, we're going to have one more, and we'll communicate the details in terms of the topic and the day and the timing. Let me also thank our panelists, Freddy Kabusia, Michael Koech, Zephania Uma, Nelson Wasilwa. You've shared with us very, very rich presentation. And I'm sure that those who have been able to listen to you are now better informed, and they've been able to get facts. And if there are myths that they had, those myths have been addressed, and now we are better informed and can make informed choices. So I want to appreciate you, our presenters, for that very, very useful presentation that you've made. Of course, our partner Safaricom, we appreciate this partnership, and we look forward to continue engaging and working together to come up with initiatives that are beneficial, not just to our members, but to the entire public. So we thank you very much, and we appreciate the partnership. Communication Authority and NEMA, as always, we have very many areas of convergence in terms of serving the public. So we'll continue engaging you, and we'll continue reaching out so that we can be able to address the various society issues. So with those remarks, ladies and gentlemen, allow me to thank you once again and wish you a nice evening, and look out for our next engagement, which we will communicate through our various communication channels. Asanteni sana, and God bless. You are free to log out. Thank you very much. Yeah, finish.